After seeing temperatures in the 80s and 90s and record highs across the Great Lakes, we even saw some snowfall across parts of Montana and Wyoming. Is that weather going to last for the upcoming week? And what is going on out in the tropics? We have all the details next at the Weather Farm. As we begin on our Monday, we are watching a cold front that is trailing from Hudson Bay back through Iowa down towards Kansas that is bringing some light showers and embedded heavier amounts of rain in isolated areas. We're also watching moisture start to flow up from the Gulf into the lower Tennessee Valley. That is going to increase as we go through our day on Monday and bring heavy amounts of rain to parts of Kentucky and Tennessee. And off the coast of Florida, we thought we might have a tropical storm development over the weekend. That didn't materialize. We weren't expecting it anyway. Only about a 10% risk is what we talked about on our Friday video. But we'll have persistent showers for the eastern coast of Florida for our Monday. Out west, we are dominated by areas of high pressure across the northern Rockies and the northern plains. This is keeping our temperatures quite cool and quite dry across this part of the country. Snow showers are making their way across Saskatchewan into Manitoba, eventually into Ontario as we get later in the week. And as we go into our Tuesday, we now have a triple high pressure with another high building in from the northern provinces of Canada down into Manitoba. This is bringing another shot of refreshingly cool air for this time of the year. Out to the east, we continue to watch that cold front make its way towards the east coast, bringing heavy amounts of rain to southern Ohio and eastern Kentucky, and even making their way up into New York State on our Tuesday morning. We still have scattered showers across the Gulf. This will be a persistent feature throughout this upcoming week. And we see as we go into our Wednesday, continued rain showers for Virginia down through the Carolinas, making their way towards places like New Jersey and Delaware. Out west, it is still very calm and quiet across most of the Rockies into the Four Corners region. We are seeing a little bit of shower activity across parts of New Mexico. This is actually an outflow from this tropical system that is in the eastern Pacific. It is spreading some moisture northward, and that's going to ignite a few showers across New Mexico into the panhandle of Texas on our Wednesday. And so what's really causing this is we have that ridge across the eastern half of the United States. Southwesterly winds are being pumped all the way up towards Maine. We get a little buckle here in the 500 millibar jet. Here's that core of that trough and colder air making its way across the Canadian provinces to Quebec, and then we have a ridge building back across the Central Plains, and this ridge is going to really take hold. It's not going to allow this low pressure or this trough off the west coast to advance onshore anytime during this upcoming week, and we're going to see that warmth build back into Montana and Wyoming. So we're going to have widespread dry conditions and warm conditions for most of the United States going into this upcoming week, and it's going to really limit our severe weather potential as well. On our Monday, we are just seeing a slight area of severe weather from the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma through central Kansas, southeastern Nebraska, into southwestern Iowa. The main threat with this on our Monday is going to be strong winds and heavy rainfall. We are not expecting much in the way of hail or tornadoes across this area. Other areas across the south, again, is that daily thunderstorm risk that we've been for the last several days across the southeast. So let's put everything into motion. We see that moisture flow up through the Ohio Valley, and here comes that trailing cold front. All that starts to move towards the east for our Tuesday. Out across the southwest, we're starting to see that moisture flow into New Mexico for our Wednesday. We watch that trough trying to make its way onshore. As we get into the later half of the week, it gets stuck by this big area of high pressure across the Central Plains. But we do see some showers start to form as we get some instability around that high pressure as we approach the upcoming weekend. We'll continue to watch for any development there as we get later in the week. In terms of our temperatures for our Monday, behind that cold front, temperatures are being held down into the 50s and 60s, which may be a little bit below normal or near normal for this time of the year. Out ahead of it, though, as we saw in that 500 millibar map, those southwesterly winds pumping warm air into the east coast where we have 70s and 80s as far north as Maine. Here across the Tennessee Valley, where we will have thunderstorms for our Monday into our Tuesday, temperatures here are going to be held down just slightly into the 70s. And out west in the deserts, we're warming back into the low 90s for our Monday. A repeat pattern for our Tuesday. That cool air does start to retreat across the northern plains back up towards Canada, where parts of western Ontario will be in the low 40s for your afternoon highs. Out across the Rocky Mountain west, temperatures here are going to be in the 50s and 60s, 90s out in the desert. Places like Phoenix, you'll be at 94. And that cool air makes its way into the northeast for our Wednesday, where highs for New York State, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine will be in the 60s, 50s as well across parts of Michigan. And as we go into Thursday, this will be the coolest day across the northeast, with some areas failing to reach the 50-degree mark for your afternoon high. And this is an area we're going to have to watch because Wednesday night into Thursday, even Thursday night, we could have the potential for widespread frost and freeze watches and warnings across the northeast, which would bring an end to the growing season for some areas. We'll watch those as those develop, and we'll see what the National Weather Service goes ahead and issues as we get toward the later half of this week. But out across the Central Plains, we are warming back into the 80s, just a sign of that ridge building back into this part of the country, and it's going to expand as we go later in this work week. In terms of our precipitation, as those storms move through the Tennessee and Ohio valleys on our Monday into our Tuesday, we're going to have a path of widespread 1 to 2 inches of rain from Kentucky through southern Ohio, and eventually making its way into the northeast for places like Buffalo, New York, Albany, even up towards Burlington, Vermont. You could see 1 to 2 inches of rain by the time we get to our Wednesday. Across the Gulf with those afternoon storms, we're going to see locally isolated heavy amounts of rain. We couldn't rule out an occasional 2 or 3 inch amount across that part of the country. And then with that moisture making its way into New Mexico, we could see flash flooding with isolated areas receiving 1 to 2 inches of rain. Heavier amounts of rain will be found over the Canadian provinces of Western Ontario, making their way up into northern Quebec, where we could see 1 to 2 inches of rain. And some of that will fall in the form of snow, where we could see a few centimeters as we get towards the later part of the week. And this is shown here on our snowfall map, as we see that snow making its way across Saskatchewan into Manitoba, and then Ontario, and eventually into Quebec. Few centimeters are likely, especially in those higher elevations. Out across the Mountain West, in places like Wyoming and into Montana, at those highest elevations, 9,000, 10,000 feet, we will see a few inches of snow as well. Zooming in on the Ohio Valley for our rainfall, as I mentioned, we're going to see the heaviest amounts of rain across the Ohio River Valley into western Kentucky, where Paducah, you could see 2.5 inches of rain by the time we get to our Wednesday. Cincinnati, you could see a couple of inches of rain. Even Columbus, you could be 1 to 2 inches of rain. Out west, though, we're going to see a heavy swath of rain making its way from eastern Kansas through southeastern Nebraska into Iowa. We could see 1 to 2 inches of rain, primarily Monday into Tuesday for this part of the country. And as that rainfall on that front moves to the east, this is where I was talking about, places like Buffalo through Burlington, Vermont, even up towards Holton, Maine, 1 to 2 inches of rain will be likely as that cold front moves through on our Tuesday into our Wednesday. But as we prepare for the upcoming weekend, we're going to start to see those temperatures now hitting the 70s and 80s across parts of Montana and Wyoming. Even in the Dakotas, you're back into the 70s. And as we make our way into our Saturday, 80s are now making their way north of the Canadian border, where a few days ago you were experiencing snowfall and temperatures in the 20s and 30s. You're now going to be rebounding into the mid-80s. 90s will be common across parts of Texas into Louisiana, as well as the desert Southwest. We're starting to see a little bit of cool air trying to move into the Sierra Nevadas, especially in those higher elevations with that air, that trough just off the west coast. As we get towards next weekend, that will start to try to let some cool air funnel in. But it's really going to be into the next week that we start to see that cool air really make its impact across the western part of the United States. And the Climate Prediction Center agrees with our thinking in that in their 8 to 14 day outlook, they have highlighted most of the western part of the United States with a good chance of below normal temperatures during that time period of October 13th through the 9th. Most of the eastern 2/3 to 3/4 of the nation, basically east of the Rockies, you're expected to have above normal temperatures during this time period. But in terms of our precipitation, we're going to see those tropical systems, those storms in the eastern Pacific, they're going to funnel a lot of moisture up through places like Arizona and Utah, even up towards Idaho and Wyoming, where we expect above normal precipitation from October 13th through the 9th. Out east from Louisiana through the Tennessee and Ohio valleys, even making its way into the northeast, we expect to see below normal precipitation during the middle part of October. As I mentioned, we're really not going to see a lot in the way of term of precipitation. We have a couple systems here in the eastern Pacific we're going to watch. That's going to provide moisture here. We have that trough off the coast of California. That's going to start to allow some cooler weather to move in as we get towards the 13th, the 14th of October, especially out west. But east, we still have those southwesterly winds indicated by these pressure lines, and we're going to see warm conditions for most of the eastern 2/3 of the United States. There may be a little bit of a tropical development off the coast of the Carolinas or just an organized area of low pressure. We're going to continue to monitor that, but we are watching as we get towards next weekend. We're going to see it here as this map resets. We're going to see a little tropical wave out here in the Atlantic. How close it gets to the United States is still to be determined, but there will be some activity out there that we are going to have to monitor, especially as we get out towards Bermuda. So let's dive right into that right now, because the National Hurricane Center has gone ahead and upgraded this area that we were watching as that wave moved off the African coast. It now has a 70% chance of development into a tropical system over the next 7 days. And they are calling this one Invest 95L. And so they're going to continue to monitor it as it moves towards the Leeward Islands. And eventually, this cone does kind of have it turning towards northwest and to the north. So places like Bermuda, you're going to need to be monitoring the latest developments of Invest 95L, because it may impact you as we get towards next weekend. If we look at the computer spaghetti plots, most of the models do have that system making its way to the west-northwest in a fairly tight area here and very consistent with its runs out to 72 hours. But as we get towards 96 hours and it approaches the Leeward Islands, by the time we get to Friday, that's when we start to see models diverging in the eventual path of that. Some of those models do want to take the storm towards Puerto Rico and the Dominican. That's to be determined. But most of them are by 96 to 120 hours from now, they're beginning to turn the storm to the northwest and eventually to the north and then curve it back out to sea. So we're going to have to watch this to see what actually plays out. Those troughs that are moving across the Canadian provinces, up and over the ridge in the Central Plains, that is definitely going to have an impact on the path of Invest 95L. and we will be sure to bring you the latest details here at the Weather Farm. Well, we hope you have a wonderful Monday. Go ahead and drop a comment of where you're watching this weather from. What was your weekend like? Were you able to get out, enjoy some pumpkin patch picking? Were you able to see and enjoy some fall festivals? Let us know down in the comments. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you real soon.